The sound ripped through the humid air of Virunga National Park, a jarring anomaly in the symphony of the rainforest. It was not the call of a bird or the rustle of unseen creatures. It was a deep, rhythmic drumming that echoed with a strange, almost human urgency. Park Ranger David, patrolling the overgrown perimeter, froze instantly. He raised his binoculars, his knuckles white, scanning the dense green wall of vegetation. Through the lenses, a familiar silhouette emerged against the backdrop of the misty mountains. It was Coco, a magnificent mountain gorilla known for her reclusive and solitary nature. She was perched dangerously close to the edge of a ravine, a chasm veiled by thick, hanging vines and treacherous undergrowth. He focused the lenses, the image sharpening into a scene that defied all his years of experience in the wild. Coco was heavily pregnant, her rounded belly a clear promise of new life, a vulnerability she usually guarded fiercely. But her posture conveyed no peace. Her amber eyes, intelligent and piercing, were locked directly onto his position, a silent, desperate plea bridging the 50 yards of untamed jungle between them. Her massive hands rose and fell against her chest, the drumming sound a frantic, deliberate signal, not a display of aggression, but a desperate summons. Then, with a motion of startling clarity, she stopped drumming and pointed a long, powerful finger directly toward the abyss at her feet. A knot of confusion and dread tightened in David's stomach. His training screamed at him to maintain distance, to interpret this as a territorial display from a stressed animal. Yet his gut told him something profound was happening. He had observed Coco for years, documenting her habits and respecting her space. He had never seen her behave this way, never seen such raw, calculated intent in her gaze. It wasn't the instinct of a wild animal he was witnessing. It was a clear attempt at communication, an act of intelligence that felt both impossible and undeniable. He felt the weight of her stare, a silent insistence that he understand the gravity of her message. He lowered his binoculars for a second, his heart hammering against his ribs, before raising them again to follow the direction of her insistent pointing. He adjusted the focus, peering past her and into the shadowy depths of the ravine. The sight that greeted him sent a cold wave of shock through his entire body, freezing the breath in his lungs. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as the impossible scene registered in his mind. What he was witnessing was not a trick of the light or a misunderstanding of animal behavior. It was a cry for help that would shatter the known boundaries between their two worlds. But to understand what was about to happen, we need to go back. Just 2 hours earlier, the world had been a masterpiece of gold and green, with sunlight filtering through the immense canopy of Virunga to paint dappled light onto the forest floor. A family, led by a local guide, walked the designated trail, their laughter a soft counterpoint to the hum of insects and distant bird calls. 6-year-old Leo, his eyes wide with wonder, was captivated by everything. For him, the jungle wasn't a place of danger, but a living storybook. He pointed at strange flowers and giggled at the antics of colobus monkeys high above. His parents, Sarah and Mark, watched him with a mixture of love and mild anxiety, feeling the comforting illusion of safety a marked path provides, a fragile bubble about to burst. The moment of separation was deceptively quiet. A blue morpho butterfly, a living jewel of iridescent sapphire, fluttered just beyond the trail's edge. Its beauty was hypnotic, pulling Leo into its orbit like a tiny planet drawn to a star. For a single, fleeting second, his parents turned to the guide to ask a question, their attention diverted. That was all it took. Leo took 2 steps off the path, his small sneakers sinking into the soft, mossy ground, his hand outstretched to touch the impossible blue. The earth, weakened and eroded by recent heavy rains, crumbled without a sound. It wasn't a dramatic fall, but a silent, sudden slide. His small, startled cry was swallowed instantly by the dense undergrowth, a sound so faint it was lost in the vast, breathing silence of the jungle. Panic arrived like a physical blow. Sarah turned, her question to the guide dying on her lips as she saw the empty space where her son had been just a moment before. "Leo," she called, her voice a thin thread of sound. The name echoed, absorbed by the thick leaves and ancient trees, returning nothing but silence. Mark's heart seized in his chest, and he plunged into the undergrowth, shouting Leo's name with a raw, desperate force. The idyllic forest transformed instantly into a menacing labyrinth of tangled vines and shadowy hollows. Every rustle of leaves was a potential sign, every shadow a trick of the light. The search began, a frantic, disorganized pulse of human terror beating against the calm, indifferent rhythm of a world that had existed long before them and would exist long after their cries faded. The guide's urgent call on his radio shattered the jungle's symphony, replacing it with the clipped, tense language of emergency. Other rangers were alerted, but the terrain was a formidable foe, bordering a network of treacherous ravines veiled by vegetation. As the minutes stretched into an agonizing hour, the golden afternoon light began to wane, and the first hints of a storm gathered in the distant sky, a low, ominous rumble vibrating through the ground. The parents' hope was a flickering candle against a gathering wind, their voices growing hoarse in the immense wilderness. They were armed only with their mounting dread, completely unaware that help was coming from a direction no one could have ever predicted. The ancient rules of the wild were about to be completely rewritten. The world snapped back into the present, the image in David's binoculars horribly clear. 30 feet down, Leo was lying on a narrow, muddy ledge. His small body was crumpled, one leg trapped at a sickeningly unnatural angle beneath a jagged rock that had fallen with him. The boy's face was pale, his eyes wide with a silent, unfocused shock. His parents' desperate cries from the ravine's edge were just faint, useless sounds against the vast indifference of the jungle, which had now become a cold stone prison. The child was conscious, but barely. He made a small, weak movement, a futile attempt to shift the rock. A visible tremor of pain shot through his body, and he collapsed back against the wet earth with a soft whimper that was lost in the open air. David could see the boy's chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid breaths. His energy was fading fast. The initial shock was giving way to a chilling lethargy, a dangerous surrender to the encroaching cold and pain. A low, deep rumble vibrated through the ground, a sound more felt than heard. It wasn't thunder. It was the sound of a massive volume of water moving with unstoppable force upstream. The true antagonist, a flash flood, was announcing its imminent arrival. The sky, moments ago a brilliant canvas, had turned a bruised, menacing gray. Heavy clouds gathered overhead, sealing the ravine in a dome of shadow and dread as the air grew thick and cold with the coming storm. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, splatting against leaves and stones with an ominous rhythm. Within moments, it became a downpour, a relentless sheet of water that turned the ravine walls slick and treacherous. The dry floor of the chasm darkened as the water level rose with terrifying speed. What had been a collection of puddles was quickly becoming a churning, muddy torrent, its current growing stronger and greedily clawing at the base of the ledge where Leo lay trapped. A knot of absolute helplessness tightened in the throats of the onlookers. The guide's frantic radio calls confirmed their worst fears. Official rescue teams were miles away, and the storm had made the terrain impassable without specialized climbing gear. They were completely cut off. Leo's parents could only watch from the edge, their faces masks of raw anguish, their desperate calls swallowed by the roar of the rain and the rising water. They were so close, yet separated by an impossible, deadly distance. Coco remained at her post, her intelligent eyes darting from the trapped child to the helpless humans and back again. She felt the flood's vibrations through the stone. She saw the boy's fading strength. The gorilla understood the equation of time and danger with a clarity that eluded the panicked adults. The water was rising, and the boy was weakening. Time was running out. Something needed to be done, or everything would be lost. David lowered his binoculars, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead. His world narrowed to a single, unbroken line of sight between his eyes and Coco's. In those deep, amber pools, he saw something that shattered every rule in his training manual. It wasn't the blank instinct of a wild beast he was looking at. It was a profound, undeniable intelligence. He saw a shared understanding of peril, a form of empathy that needed no words. Coco's gaze held the fierce protective fire of a mother-to-be, a silent acknowledgement of the human parents. Agony. A primal certainty settled in his gut. a conviction that this creature understood the stakes better than anyone. He was witnessing not a threat, but the only possible solution, a miracle waiting for permission. A shout from another ranger cut through the air, sharp with panic. "David, we need a decision. She's too close." The standard protocol was clear. Neutralize any potential threat to a human life, especially a child. Every fiber of his professional being screamed at him to follow the rules, to see Coco as a 400-pound variable in an already catastrophic equation. Yet, as he watched her shift her weight, her eyes never leaving the child, he knew the rules no longer applied. This wasn't a problem to be solved with force. It was a bridge of trust that needed to be crossed. In that moment, David made a choice that would either save a life or end his career in tragedy. He was betting everything on a gorilla's heart. With a steady hand that betrayed the storm raging inside him, David lifted his radio. His voice cut through the static and the roar of the flood with absolute authority. "All units, hold your fire," he commanded, his words clear and unwavering. "I say again, hold your fire. Do not engage. Let her approach the child." A stunned silence followed, broken only by the sound of the rain. The guide stared at him, his face a mask of disbelief. But David's expression was resolute, a wall of conviction. He had just defied every protocol, placing a boy's life into the hands of a wild animal based on nothing more than a look, a feeling, a desperate leap of faith across the chasm separating their species. Coco seemed to understand. The tension in her massive shoulders eased as the perceived threat from the armed men receded. She turned her full attention to the ravine, her mind a focused map of the descent. She felt the vibrations of the rising water through the soles of her feet and knew time was a luxury they did not have. With a low guttural sound, not of aggression but of grim determination, she moved to the edge of the precipice. Her powerful knuckles gripped the slick, wet rock, testing her hold. The crowd of helpless humans held their breath, their fear momentarily replaced by a stunned awe. With a determination that silenced everyone, Coco began her descent, every movement a promise. Time itself seemed to warp and stretch, each second elongating into an eternity. The world slowed to a crawl, every detail magnified and etched into memory. Coco's descent was a masterpiece of controlled power, a ballet of muscle and instinct against the vertical, rain-slaked rock. Her knuckles, broad and calloused, found impossible holds in the stone, each placement deliberate and sure. The immense muscles in her back and shoulders bunched and released, a silent testament to the strength required to navigate the treacherous wall while instinctively shielding her own precious cargo. Loose stones, dislodged by her careful movements, tumbled past her, their small splashes into the churning water below, serving as a grim metronome, counting down the seconds Leo had left. The boy, small and pale on his rocky perch, simply watched, his fear eclipsed by a profound, silent awe. As she reached the ledge, the rising water was already greedily licking at its edges, a muddy, swirling tide that threatened to pull the boy into its cold embrace. Coco did not rush. She moved with a grace that defied her size, her massive form a shield between the child and the abyss. She let out a low, guttural rumble, a sound that vibrated not with menace, but with a deep, calming resonance that seemed to quiet the storm itself. It was a sound of reassurance, the primal language of comfort that Leo's terrified mind understood instantly. He watched as one of her enormous, leathery hands, a tool of incredible force, reached toward him not with aggression, but with the gentle curiosity of a mother checking on her young. Her touch was impossibly delicate. The tips of her long fingers, capable of snapping bamboo-like twigs, brushed against the cold, jagged rock that pinned his leg. She tested its weight, her intelligent eyes assessing the physics of the trap, with a focus that was startlingly analytical. She felt the subtle shift of the stone, calculated the precise amount of force needed. There was no brute strength here, only a surgeon's precision. Her other hand rested gently on the ground beside Leo's shoulder, a steadying presence, a silent promise that he was no longer alone in his terror. For a moment her gaze met his, and in her deep amber eyes the boy saw not a beast, but a guardian. With a controlled, powerful heave, she nudged the rock. It didn't fly. It shifted, grinding against the ledge just enough to create a space. The pressure on Leo's leg vanished, replaced by a dull, throbbing ache of release. A small gasp escaped his lips, the first sound he had made in minutes. Before he could even process his freedom, Coco's arms were around him. She scooped him up with astonishing tenderness, cradling his small, shivering body against the coarse, warm fur of her chest. He was enveloped in her scent of rain, earth, and wildness, and the steady, powerful beat of her heart against his ear was the most comforting sound in the world. He was safe. The ascent was a testament to her raw, unwavering determination. Now burdened with the boy's weight, her climb was slower, more arduous. Every muscle strained as she pulled their combined mass upward, away from the hungry floodwaters that now completely submerged the ledge. She moved with a singular, protective focus, her body a living wall shielding him from the driving rain and the sheer drop below. The humans above watched in stunned, breathless silence, their own fears and prejudices dissolving with every foot of progress Coco made. They were not witnessing a wild animal. They were witnessing a hero, performing an act of impossible courage and compassion. Reaching the top, she didn't drop him or push him away. She gently, carefully placed him on the solid, muddy ground as if he were her own precious offspring. For one breathtaking, sacred moment, time stood still. The world of man and the world of the wild merged into a single, stunned silence, broken only by the sound of the rain. The parents, frozen in disbelief, stared at the gorilla who had just saved their son. Coco held their gaze for a second, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, before she looked directly at David, her eyes conveying a message of profound, shared understanding. Then, with a quiet dignity, she turned and began to retreat. 2 weeks later, the sun bathed Virunga in a gentle, forgiving light, transforming the once menacing ravine into a place of serene beauty. The roar of the flood was a distant memory, replaced by the soft murmur of a peaceful stream. David sat on a smooth, sun-warmed rock watching Leo, whose leg, now free of its cast, bore only a faint silver scar as a souvenir of his ordeal. The boy wasn't timid or fearful. Instead, he sat cross-legged, a sketchbook open on his lap, his crayons moving with a focused intensity. The terror of that day had been miraculously replaced by a quiet, profound reverence for the jungle. He felt its life force not as a threat, but as a protective embrace. David observed him, a deep sense of peace settling in his own heart, realizing the jungle had not taken something from the boy but had given him a gift of understanding few ever receive. Leo looked up, his eyes bright with accomplishment, and turned the sketchbook for David to see. It wasn't a picture of the helicopters or the rescue team. It was a drawing of a magnificent gorilla, her kind, amber eyes rendered with surprising detail. Nestled safely in her arms was a tiny baby gorilla, and next to them, a small boy with a crayon in his hand. David felt a lump form in his throat. His entire career had been built on scientific observation and maintaining a professional distance, but that single, selfless act had shattered his clinical detachment forever. He no longer saw subjects to be studied, but fellow beings with complex emotional lives. He felt an unbreakable bond, not just to this resilient child, but to the silent, watchful guardian of the forest who had taught him the true meaning of courage. The story rippled through the community and beyond, becoming a quiet legend that subtly reshaped the relationship between the park and the people who lived on its borders. The gorillas were no longer just a tourist attraction or a conservation statistic. They were neighbors, imbued with a new, profound respect. David still patrolled this perimeter, but his purpose had shifted. He often found himself scanning the dense green canopy, not just for poachers, but for a familiar silhouette. He'd heard from trackers that Coco had given birth to a healthy infant, a new life brought safely into the world by a mother who had risked everything for the child of another species. The invisible wall between their worlds had been replaced by a permanent bridge, built on a foundation of shared vulnerability and impossible trust. That day, the line separating man from beast was revealed for what it truly was, an illusion. The incident proved that the most powerful forces in the universe, courage, empathy, and the fierce, unwavering instinct to protect the innocent are not confined to a single species. They are the universal language of life, a sacred code that connects every beating heart. Coco's heroism wasn't just a rescue. It was a profound lesson etched into the memory of all who witnessed it, a reminder that the greatest strength is found in the gentlest touch. Do you also believe animals can teach us about love? Share your story in the comments, let us know where you're watching from, and subscribe for more moments that restore faith in the world.